Here is something you did this morning without thinking about it. You let go of a cup and you expected it to fall. You turned a tap and you expected water. You took a step and you expected the floor to hold you. Every one of those expectations was a prediction about the future, and every one of them was built on the past. The cup fell yesterday, so it will fall today. This is the most natural thing in the world to do. We do it constantly. And almost 300 years ago, a Scottish philosopher named David Hume looked very closely at this ordinary act of expecting and found a hole at the bottom of it. A hole that, to this day, nobody has cleanly filled. Let's build up to it slowly, because the argument is sharper than it first looks. Start with a single observation. You see a flame and you feel heat. That's one event followed by another. Hume would call the flame the cause and the heat the effect. But notice what you actually observed. You observed the flame. Then you observed the heat. You did not observe a third thing, a link, a thread, some glue connecting the two. You saw one and then you saw the other. Take a moment to sit with that, because it's easy to skip past. When you watch one billiard ball strike another and the second rolls away, it feels like you can see the force travel from the first into the second. But what reaches your eyes is just this: a moving ball, a moment of contact, a second moving ball. The force, the necessary connection between them, the thing that makes the second ball have to move, that part you never actually see. You see the sequence. You supply the connection. Hume has a tidy way of checking this. Every idea in your head, he says, can be traced back to something you actually experienced, some impression that came in through the senses. The idea of red traces back to seeing red. The idea of cold traces back to feeling cold. So when you claim to have an idea of necessary connection, of one event making another happen, Hume asks the simple, deadly question: where is the impression? Point to the experience this idea came from. And when you look for it in the case of the two billiard balls, you find the first ball, the contact, the second ball. You never find the making. The necessity has no impression behind it. So where does the connection come from if not from the world? Hume's answer is that it comes from repetition. But the repetition happens inside you. You have seen one ball strike another thousands of times. The conjunction of the two events, one then the other, has been constant. He calls this constant conjunction, and the phrase is doing careful work. All you have ever observed is that the two events go together, again and again. Constant conjunction is the most the senses ever give you, and after enough repetitions, your mind does something automatic. When you see the first ball move toward the second, your mind already leaps ahead to the second ball moving. You feel the certainty arrive. But that feeling of certainty lives in you. It is a habit of the mind, a custom worn in by repetition, the same way a path gets worn into grass by walking it. It is not something you read off the world. The connection you were so sure you saw out there turns out to be a feeling produced in here. Now we can sharpen the problem into its real shape. Every prediction you make about the future relies on a single assumption. The assumption is that the future will resemble the past, that the patterns that have held so far will keep holding. Hume calls this the principle that nature is uniform, that the unobserved will be like the observed. Let's call it the uniformity principle, and let's give it a clear statement. The future will resemble the past. Everything rests on this. Every scientific law, every habit, every plan. When you predict that the sun will rise tomorrow, you are not reasoning purely from astronomy. Underneath, you are assuming that the regularities that held yesterday will hold again. Take away the uniformity principle and the prediction collapses. The sun has risen every day in recorded history, but it always has only tells you about tomorrow if you already assume tomorrow will be like the days before it. So here is the question Hume asks, and it is the hinge of the whole argument. How do we know the uniformity principle is true? What justifies it? There are only two kinds of justification available. Hume divides all reasoning into two boxes, and the division is clean, so let's lay them both out. The first box he calls relations of ideas. These are truths you can work out by thought alone. That a triangle has 3 sides, that 2 + 2 is 4, that all bachelors are unmarried, You don't need to run an experiment to check whether 2 plus 2 is 4. To deny it is to contradict yourself. These truths are certain, but notice the price of that certainty. They tell you nothing new about the world. All bachelors are unmarried is guaranteed precisely because it just unpacks the meaning of a word. The second box he calls matters of fact. These are truths about how the world actually is. That the water in the kettle is boiling, that it rained last night, that the flame is hot. You cannot work these out by thought alone. You have to go and look. And here is their defining feature. The opposite is always possible without contradiction. The kettle might not have boiled, it might have rained, or it might not have. There is no contradiction in imagining the sun failing to rise tomorrow. Strange, yes. Unlikely, sure. But not a contradiction, the way a four-sided triangle is. Two boxes: relations of ideas, certain but empty of new information; matters of fact, informative but never certain. Hume's claim is that every piece of reasoning you have falls into one of these two. So let's take the uniformity principle and ask which box it goes in. Is it a relation of ideas? Can we prove, by thought alone, that the future must resemble the past? Run with me on this one for a moment. Try to imagine a world where the rules change tomorrow, where bread, which has nourished you every day of your life, suddenly fails to, where the sun doesn't rise. Can you picture it? You can. It's a strange world, but there's no contradiction in it. Nothing about the concept of the future logically forces it to copy the past. So the uniformity principle is not a relation of ideas. If it were, the opposite would be unthinkable, and it isn't. All right, then it must be in the other box. It's a matter of fact, something we learn from experience. And this feels right. Of course we know the future resembles the past from experience. We've watched it happen. The future keeps turning into a present that looks like the past did. We have mountains of evidence. But watch what happens when we try to actually run this argument. Watch closely because this is the trap. How would the evidence work? It would go like this. In the past, the future kept resembling the past. Predictions based on uniformity kept coming true. So uniformity is reliable, so it will keep being reliable in the future. Do you see what just happened? To get from uniformity worked in the past to uniformity will work in the future, you had to assume that the future resembles the past. You use the uniformity principle to justify the uniformity principle. Let me say that again, slowly, because it's the whole argument. We wanted to justify the assumption that the future resembles the past. Our only evidence is from the past. To make past evidence tell us anything about the future, we have to assume the future resembles the past, which is the very thing we were trying to prove. The argument goes in a circle. It assumes what it sets out to establish. And to feel why that circle should bother you, picture the kind of case where the past genuinely misleads. Let's say there's a bird on a farm, and every morning at dawn, the farmer appears and brings food. Day 1, day 2, day 50. The conjunction is perfectly constant. By the 100th morning, the bird has the best inductive evidence imaginable that the farmer means food. Every observation points the same way. And then, one morning in late December, the farmer appears and does not bring food. The bird's evidence was flawless right up to the moment it failed. More observations didn't help. They just made the bird more confident on the way to being wrong. That's the gap Hume is pointing at. No pile of past instances, however high, contains a guarantee about the next one. So look at where we are. The uniformity principle isn't a relation of ideas because its denial is not a contradiction. And it can't be established as a matter of fact because every attempt to do so secretly assumes it. Both boxes are closed. There is no third box. And that means the principle on which every prediction you have ever made depends, the assumption underneath all of science and all of daily life, cannot be rationally justified at all. This is Hume's problem of induction. Induction is the name for this kind of reasoning, where you move from specific observed cases to a general rule, or from the past to the future. And the problem is that this reasoning, the engine of nearly everything we claim to know, has no foundation that reason can supply. Now, take a breath, because it's important to be precise about what Hume is not saying. He is not saying the sun won't rise tomorrow. He is not telling you to stop trusting bread, or to expect the floor to vanish. Hume himself thought that would be absurd, and he said so plainly. He kept expecting the sun like everyone else. His point is about justification, not behavior. We do reason from past to future, constantly, and we can't help it. The question was never whether we make these inferences. The question was whether reason is what's driving them, and Hume's answer is that it isn't. What carries you from the past to the future is not an argument. It's habit, custom, the same mental reflex that made you flinch toward the second billiard ball. Nature built you to expect, and you expect, and no chain of logic is doing the work underneath. So the next time you let go of a cup and feel that quiet certainty that it will fall, notice the certainty. It's real, but it isn't a conclusion you've reasoned your way to. It's something softer and stranger, a habit the world has trained into you, standing in the place where you always assumed an argument was. Hume found the hole almost 300 years ago. People have been trying to climb out of it ever since, and it's worth seeing the shape of a few attempts, because each one reveals how stubborn the problem is. One response says, the demand for justification is confused from the start. To call a belief reasonable just means it was formed by induction. Asking induction to justify itself is like asking whether the meter stick is really a meter long. You're holding the standard up against itself. On this view, Hume found something true but harmless. Induction is groundless. And that's fine, because being groundless in that particular way is simply what reasonable belief looks like. Another response gives up on certainty and reaches for probability instead. We can't prove the sun will rise, but surely it's overwhelmingly likely, given how often it has. This feels like progress, until you ask where the probability comes from. It comes from past frequencies. The sun rose on almost every day we have records of, so we judge tomorrow likely. But that inference, from past frequency to future probability, is induction again. The same circle has just put on a new coat. Probability doesn't escape the problem so much as restate it in numbers. A third response simply accepts the conclusion and stops looking for a foundation. We reason inductively because we are built to, the way we breathe because we are built to. The practice needs no license from reason to keep running. That's close to what Hume himself seems to settle for, and you might find it either deeply honest or deeply unsatisfying. But the whole is still there. None of these answers fills it so much as decides how to live beside it. And it sits at the bottom of every expectation you'll have tomorrow.